Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm excited here this afternoon. My name is Barrie Laver. I run venture capital and private equity for the Royal Bank, based out of Toronto. So we are a strategic corporate venture unit. And with some relevance to this conversation, we're talking about the role of strategic investors in the energy transition. So I'm very excited to welcome a panel of two financial-focused VCs and two corporate strategically focused VCs. And why don't we take our seats, and maybe I'll start by asking each of you to introduce yourself and a little bit of a commentary on the focus of your fund. And with Erin, I'll start with you.
Sure, I'll kick us off here. So Erin Madro, I'm with Evok Innovations. We're a venture capital group focused on early stage clean tech and climate tech. Fund 2 is our latest fund, and it's focused on industrial decarbonization. So for us, that means things like hydrogen, carbon removal technologies, electrification, a lot of the things and flavors that we've been talking about over the course of today and tomorrow in terms of disruption and energy transition. And so we lead deals. We're headquartered in Vancouver, and we invest on both sides of the border in Canada and US. And we're very active in the companies. Our whole company has a very technical sort of core. I'm a chemical engineer by trade and have evolved into the financial space. All of our partners have once been entrepreneurs themselves. They've lived the clean tech journey and struggled through those challenges. So we really think of ourselves as founders first and supporting this sort of very challenging heavy lift of industrial decarbonization in the hard tech ecosystem.
Catherine?
Yes, so I'm a partner at Cycle Capital. We have 7 funds under management. We have some funds that are dedicated to the climate tech sector. So think of everything ranging from mobility to all kinds of technologies related to energy. And we have as well in early stage, we're investing at the venture growth stage. So think of Series B, but we also have an early stage fund dedicated to water and a fund dedicated to circular innovation as well. We're investing mostly in North America, but also have a fund that invests in Europe doing direct and indirect deals. As well, we're a platform. So we have an accelerator that helps support Canadian entrepreneurs into, crossing the huge gap, the huge bridge leading to the first early stage round of financing.
Derek.
So Derek Willis, I'm a Vice President of Commercial Development for Oxy Low Carbon Ventures, which is a subsidiary of Occidental Petroleum. I primarily focus on investing in and commercializing technologies. We're not a CVC, right? So we're not a corporate venture capital fund. We really are a strategic investor. So we look for opportunities to invest in companies and technologies where we can drive value, and that what that looks like in each investment will differ, right? But primarily focused on earlier stage deep tech technologies, but we've made one growth equity investment where we're looking at ways that we can get involved in later stages. Check sizes can be as small as 2.5 and as large as, we've made a $50 million investment before. So, we've got some flexibility. It's not a dedicated fund. We invest off balance sheet. So just a lot of flexibility. The areas that we look at are primarily around CO2 capture, sequestration, utilization, and technologies in and around that. We'll talk more about direct air capture as kind of a case study of how we think about strategic investing, but also focused on grid reliability and stability, power generation. We actually have a lithium extraction business too that we've been working on. So really, I say that Oxy Low Carbon Ventures is focused on energy transition verticals in which we as a company can play a significant role.
Yeah, hi everybody. Lee Evans, I head up TC Energy's energy transition activities. So TC Energy's, as of today, only a large natural gas and power generation midstream company focused across Canada, United States, and Mexico. And for my role, I really focus on helping support the organization's decarbonization efforts internally. So thinking about our natural gas pipeline footprint and thinking about the emissions profile that it has across the continent and thinking about ways to ultimately solve that decarbonization challenge. So my team is sort of focused on two main things. We work on direct investments as well as fund investments to help us understand the technologies of tomorrow that are going to support our journey. And we ultimately have a small team that's actually here in the room today that's helping some of our piloting activities. And some of them are there to take those technologies and try to get them put into the ground and make them a realization. So for us, like with a dual-pronged approach of investing in funds as well as direct investments, we would look for our funds to take a much more earlier stage approach to investing, things that not necessarily as an organization we might be as comfortable with a de-risking standpoint. So we let those do the earlier stage investing for us that stay across and understand the broad range of opportunities across the broader energy ecosystem. And where we'll directly invest and put our effort in, much like Derek's team, is on technologies that are really critical for supporting TC Energy's problems. So focusing on CO2 capture, hydrogen opportunities, as well as thinking about potential long-term electrification solutions and thinking about methane. So those are probably, I mean, focus check sizes probably on the directs, probably $5 to $10 million. On the fund size, those can go up a little bit because of commitments over a multi-year period as a whole, but I've deployed about a little over $100 million of capital and continue to look to rotate that investment portfolio here and continue to make investments over time.
Great, thank you. So we've heard a lot of discussion over the last few years and certainly today about the amount of capital that's required to drive the energy transition. And so maybe, Erin, I'll start with you. And can you talk about the importance from your perspective as a financial investor of the strategic investors in the market?
Yeah, sure. So everything we're talking about today doesn't happen without strategics in play. As far as energy transition is concerned, it's absolutely imperative. And so when you have these early stage companies with these brilliant technologies, brilliant ideas, they only go so far before they absolutely must work with strategics to commercialize their product or their system or process, whatever their innovation may be. And so the question is when to involve them and what that role looks like changes and varies from company to company. But I think what works well and what I see where that intersection starts to come into play in a strong way is when a company is kind of ready to go to the field, ready to do a pilot, ready to start showing that this thing is commercial potential, having strategic partners in the mix to host their technology, provide some insight and feedback, provide a little bit of capital to queue in, get a little bit of skin in the game and so on. These types of partnerships can be very, very beneficial for both parties, I think, certainly in terms of the survival of the startup. If they don't have demonstration of commercial partnerships and strategic, engagements that are underway, they're not going to be able to raise capital full stop. And on the other hand, I think strategics, engage in a certain strategic way to understand where some of these technologies are go. A lot of the R&D cutting edge piece of it has been de-risked by the time they get involved, and it's the heavy lift of engineering, procurement, construction, financing, some of the things that strategics do much better than startups and are much better positioned to engage in. So there's this myriad of ways that strategics and early stage ventures sort of dance together, and sometimes it feels like David and Goliath, and sometimes it's on more equal footing, but I think it goes without saying it's absolutely critical.
So Derek, maybe I can ask you to chat a little bit, and I'll ask Lee to comment also. So what do you see as best practices for a strategic investor?
So I think I'll echo a lot of what Erin just said, right? I mean, I think, again, we look for opportunities to help drive value, and what that looks like can differ, right? So, helping with pilots and demos of projects, I think, is a really critical piece. I think we also, we have a hand in building or participating in the building of ecosystems. I think being able to help startups think through the development of these ecosystems and how and what they're going to look like in the future, I think, is really critical. And yes, engineering and procurement on projects, I think, is something that Oxy obviously is very comfortable with. But there's also, we've got some really deep expertise in low carbon ventures in and around chemistries and how we think about electrochemical, and a lot of that can help companies at an earlier stage. Best practices in engagement, I think, we talked a little bit about this earlier, Catherine. I think I think it's good not to get too involved in corporate governance. We generally tend to take board observer roles, not board roles, and really as an observer, we're there to help the board think through things if we're prompted, right? I think the other best practice is meeting regularly with the company and exploring ways in which we can strengthen the relationship. I think also that meeting with the investors, the financial investors who are, I think, a critical component of the overall capital structure, meeting with them and sort of exploring ways in which we can help drive value, I think is a really good thing. I think there's, engagement can look different. Obviously, it's really kind of bespoke based on the investment. We generally try, when we make our investments up front, not to have any of the strings attached, right? I think I've described the way our relationships develop as organic, right? We'll start off with an investment and then let's see where it goes. I think we've got a view on where it goes, but it evolves and pivots and I think that it's important to just be aware of that and stay on top of that.
Lee, anything you'd expand on there in terms of best practices?
Yeah, no, I mean, those are all good points. I mean, the only sort of piece I'd highlight is from our standpoint, is just the engagement with our startups as a whole and the financial community, understanding what it takes to build. In some cases, we're focusing on hard tech problems, right? And so this is detailed engineering, complex engineering in a lot of cases, and I've got multiple pathways to sort of solving these challenges. And so making sure that we're can spend time with the investor base, making sure we don't like getting into cap tables that are really messy with a lot of different players. We like cleaner cap tables that bring strong alignment of all the financial investors that are supporting the organization, and making sure we understand how we can support them, and making sure that everyone understands the journey that it'll take from getting to negative cash flows to positive cash flows at the end of the day is an important one.
So you have a good segue there into, I'll say indirectly, syndicate construction. Anyone who's been in venture for a while knows that good companies can get killed by the wrong syndicate, wrong mix of investors. I'm sort of interested, Catherine, what's Cycle's approach to looking at syndicate construction when you're going in at an early stage?
Yeah, so we believe in the value that the corporates bring, both from an LP perspective, co-investor perspective, and specifically on the board. In some cases, we've had, board members, corporate strategic board members, and it all went right. And when it did, is because we were able to create this kind of balance. You referred to David and Goliath. I was going to say is having sometimes two gorillas in the room, and kind of you need to make them behave, right? So it's challenging. Not all the CVCs are the same. You need to you learn how to deal with them, and you really need to get a good understanding of what their vision is, what their organizational structure is, how do they integrate the innovation afterwards, because it really tells you where they're going and what their intent is. And we've seen all, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and when it's ugly, it can really kill a company. So it's about bringing on board other players that can help balance that thing.
So let's pick up on that a little bit. When you think of the syndicate construction, and Erin, maybe you can give us an example, if you don't mind, without naming names, of situations where it may not have worked the way you wanted it to work.
Yeah, so I'll give a story, and it speaks a little bit to the reason why Evok was formed in the first place. But once upon a time, there was a large strategic who wanted to progress the ecosystem, wanted to make early stage venture investments and help these companies through the proverbial valley of death to get to the other side and serve their business needs. Sounds great. So they went out and made a number of venture investments, and eventually one very seasoned, skilled, and capable entrepreneur came along, looked at the term sheet and went, "Are you kidding me? You're gonna kill my company and prevent me from raising any further capital go forward." And of course, this large strategic entity went, "Seriously, really? We had no idea. We were just protecting our interests." And those interests were that, things like they would keep the IP if the company did any number of things that, they would have first rights and certain commercial. It was so onerous that this company literally would die upon the moment it accepted this term sheet. And of course, this entrepreneur kind of laughed and said, "Try again," and had the ability and the seasonality to be able to do that. So of course, as this went on, big corporate strategic realized they weren't very good at this. They didn't really get venture, and so they brought a seasoned expert and sort of venture capitalist into the mix to sort of run this fund on behalf of them. But interestingly, that one entrepreneur also came back and said, "How many other companies have you issued term sheets like this to?" And they said, "Well, it was this," and he said, "You go back to those companies and you revise this because you will kill them all." And I admire his ability to do that and go back. But it sort of speaks to, companies, large corporates are there to, they have good intentions, but at the end of the day, they're public companies. Oftentimes they have to sort of watch their backs and make sure that nothing goes really wrong in terms of making these investments. And so I think, that's one example of ways that strategics can badly kill a company because they don't really know what they're doing. They don't really get venture. And that sort of myriad of strategics and financials sort of in the mix. I think financials sort of paint the picture a bit differently. We're about managing and governing and getting this company into venture scale returns in a certain period of time in a certain way. And our priorities are largely first and foremost the team, second, execution and deployment, and of course, third, keeping the technology going strong. Strategics are technology first, market somewhere in the second, and team, kind of a distant third. I don't think most strategics care or are willing to sort of make key strategic changes that need to happen at an executive level for a team. That may include, replacing or changing the CEO. And so each of these different players play different roles. They see things differently, and I think the combination of them all works good. But there's these checks and balances that I think have to come into play when you have these players, particularly if they're on the board and in any capacity where they're actually controlling the company.
So maybe I'll pick up on that comment and Lee, ask you how you think about as a strategic portfolio construction, and how you think about the rights of TC when you're investing in a company, and how you want to interact with the other investors in the company.
Yeah, so portfolio construction for us will be, again, we'll take a multi-prong approach where we'll invest in funds as well as directs. So we've got funds that are investing in more portfolio companies that have the abilities to manage the broader exposures to the organization, to these sorts of investments. And again, focusing on the directs where we're spending a little bit more time on, we're spending a little bit more active engagement with those folks, as Erin suggested, to making sure that the right checks and balances. We, Mike, much like Derek, we'll take board observer seats. We're not looking to govern the organizations. We're there to understand the direction and support its ultimate success. So from our standpoint, these are just clear table stakes that we have to ultimately sort of support, broadly speaking. But from our standpoint, there's never, every situation is a little bit different, and from where we kind of sit, it's something that is going to continue to evolve from the opportunity to support those organizations. Everyone will look a little bit different. So we've got earlier stage companies in our portfolio that require a lot more guidance and direction around their technology and what it ultimately requires to get it in the field. So we're spending a lot more time from an engineering standpoint. Some of the another investment we've made is a lot more, it's got a commercial product in the marketplace here today. Now it's working with our commercial teams to bringing that on into our asset mix and thinking about the solutions and how we ultimately sort of scale that, broadly speaking. So it can certainly, it varies, and there's no one solution to fit all.
I want to pick up another one of Erin's comments, hopefully not controversially, but as a strategic with a board observer role and an active investor, philosophically, do you feel comfortable really rolling up your sleeves if you see management issues and trying to work with the other investors to affect change?
Yeah, we haven't had that exposure here directly, to be candidly honest. But that's why we like having those financial players at the plate, because that's not the role we're looking to take. So when we're looking for that cap, when we're looking at that cap table and we're seeing the investors we're investing alongside, are they the right ones there to help us support those teams? I mean, Erin talked about team at the bottom end of the table for VCs. In fact, actually for us, team is actually one of the most important things. And do they have the right team? But recognizing the team that might be in place today may not be the right one to support it longer term. And we're fully eyes wide open, understanding that those things will change and we'll be there to support it. But again, not necessarily always having the most influential voice in the room, because we're making very small contributions, ownership stakes typically that are less than 10%. So from our standpoint, we have very little ability to influence, but we're there to support when those things do come around.
So Catherine, some financial investors will take the view they don't want a strategic on the cap table unless there's a commercial agreement in place. And some will take the view they're quite happy to have the strategic come to the table with a potential future commercial agreement. Do you have what's your perspective on it?
We've had all kinds, and I think aside from just having a commercial agreement is really understanding how deep that commercial agreement is, how big it is. And perhaps if it's an earlier stage company, then it's normal that the corporate doesn't want to get involved at that stage because it's too early still. But, again, it's really understanding what the strategy is. And we've had, I'm thinking of lots of investors thinking of BMW as one of them, and they came in and they ended up, becoming a customer of the technology they had seen, but wasn't quite at the stage where they would see it. Obviously, it's the automotive business takes forever to, take on new technologies and put it in the supply chain. So, but it ended up happening, and it's huge for a company. So we see that as very valuable, but we take a lot of time at understanding how deep the relationship is to understand how, because for us, Series A, B, C, whatever the alphabet letter you're using is there's a lot more information that you need to understand what value can bring to the company and the corporate can bring to it as well.
Derek, maybe I'll take the opportunity to sort of ask you about a specific case. Oxy was an investor in carbon engineering. Can you sort of walk us through this story of what was the driver for the initial investment and how that evolved?
Sure. I think, so we invested early 2019, which is about the time I got to Oxy Low Carbon Ventures. The Oxy Low Carbon Ventures was formed to leverage Occidental's expertise in handling and sequestering CO2 as part of its enhanced oil recovery operations. We've got a pretty vast network and a pretty advanced EOR program that's based on CO2. So we understand the subsurface dynamics, we understand the transportation of CO2, and have whole teams that are devoted to it. So we looked at direct air capture as a way to leverage that expertise, right? And so we looked at a variety of different direct air capture technologies and landed on carbon engineering because we felt like liquid sorbent-based direct air capture technology was scalable to a point where we could make a difference. That also comes with a hefty capex but we fully recognize that. So our vision when we invested in carbon engineering was we want to ultimately get a license to the technology, and we want to start developing direct air capture projects. When we first made the investment, there was no agreement in place. We weren't asked to have an agreement in place, but everybody sort of recognized the value that we brought to the table. That relationship evolved over time, and again, I described it a little bit earlier as kind of an organic, evolution, but it evolved over time to a license agreement that evolved into a deeper relationship, and then ultimately, after a couple of more investments, evolved to a point where both sides recognized the sort of level of indispensability that we had with each other, and made that next step of acquiring Carbon Engineering in late 23. And for those that don't know, we're working on our first at-scale plant in Odessa, Texas, where we'll capture 500,000 metric tons of CO2 annually, and we'll sequester it into the ground. So I made reference to our EOR. It's important to note that we're not using any of that CO2 in our EOR, but sequestering it into the ground, and then we've been pre-selling CDRs on that. And so why it's such an interesting case study is, again, purely organic. It wasn't our intention when we first made the investment, but we built a whole business around that direct air capture technology. And it's, you know, it's the capture piece, it's the sequestration piece, which is the piece that we know and are really good at. And then it's the CDR side, which we had to create, right? And are still working on creating. But it's building the business that we now call 1.5 on the basis of that initial investment. And I think it's useful. It's certainly one potential outcome for our investments. There are many others where we have no intention of acquiring the technologies, but we continue to support and think it's really critical to the overall ecosystems that we support it. But Carbon Engineering is a good example of how we think about investing.
Maybe, Erin, I can ask you to comment. In a situation like that, where you've got a mix of financials and strategic investors, and it's clear that there's an acquisition interest on the part of one or maybe multiple strategics, from a board and company perspective, maybe just very briefly, how would you comment on how you manage those sorts of issues?
Mm-hmm. Like I said, it's a bit of a dance, right? I think there's certainly advantages to having strategics early on and having that potential acquisition pathway, but it also can get complicated because there's conflicts of interest. If you want to, as a financial, I want as many potential strategics around the table for that potential exit at whatever point it comes, to drum up competition, to make this company as valuable as I possibly can. And it becomes a little bit tricky when you have strategics in the mix who, you know, have participated in the growth of this and have been part of that journey. And so you don't want to pigeonhole yourself, I guess I would say, with a particular strategic and only have that as your one track into an exit, because it's you know, it may never happen, and a lot of things change on the corporate side that you know, the reason why they invested at one point in time may not stand the test of time with future leadership, with future strategic changes. And so it's a great option to have. But I certainly wouldn't bank everything I have on one or even two strategics on the cap table to be my exit plan. But to the extent that they can really provide value, help with the heavy lift along the way, provide resources to the extent that they can, provide I think what they do more than anything else is I think they validate that this technology is legit, and somebody cares enough to put a bit of equity, put a bit of skin in the game, and actually help this thing along the way because they see the potential. And I think that speaks volumes. Certainly when a company is going out for growth capital, you've got strategics around the table, you've got commercial, you know, LOIs and all the rest in the mix, and you've got a really great company that's poised to do very well. But you don't want to limit all the options around the table. And I think for companies that have a lot of strategics around the table, and I've looked at companies that have like 8 or 9 involved, and it's like a massive SAFE agreement, and it's like, what is going on here? I think the challenge is you got to look carefully at some of the side letters and how all these different strategic entities intermingle and coexist and what lanes they play in. And it's this, you know, much larger dance with all of these different entities that play different roles at different stages of the journey of the company. But all that to say, it's a very good signal, but you do have to be careful about how those arrangements evolve over time, because at the end of the day, you know, they're much more powerful than you are as a startup. They have much more weight and control. And at the end of the day, the stakes aren't nearly as high for them as it is for the startup. And so it's this delicate balance between all of the players that are moving this forward.
Derek or Lee, any comments on your end in terms of managing some of those conflicts as shareholders and potentially board observers?
Well, I agree that it is exceedingly complex. I think when we first started talking acquisition with Carbon Engineering, I think we felt it was important for there to be buy-in not only with management but the entire capital stack, right? And so we were very open and honest in the approach, and encouraged them, and they did indeed sort of test the market, and I think that's very important, right? Because it ultimately validated this pathway that we took, and everyone I think was pretty comfortable with it. But it requires a lot of thought, right? And I think it's important to make sure that for the other investors that you're able to maintain the flexibility to test the market and maybe understand what your options are, and it's certainly crucial for the board. So it is complex, and again, I don't see us doing that very often. This isn't a pathway for corp dev for us, and primarily for that reason. It's extraordinarily complex.
No, I agree. Like, we're not there to influence. We want to see good outcomes for organizations that are solving hard problems. So from our standpoint, we're there to support what's in the best interest of the organization first. Corporately, yes, we'd love to see certain things get solved, but at the end of the day, we wear a couple of hats. We wear a fiduciary duty hat to the investment that we're making as a whole, and that's where we try to sit first and foremost with our thinking, but obviously thinking about the corporation's needs. Most of these opportunities that we think about are not long-term corporate development or acquisitions for us as a whole. These are technologies that we see value in investing, that we bring strategic value to supporting their commercialization, not necessarily to be going off and selling their products and services. But if there's an opportunity for a company that's out there, we always ask, the first question we'll always ask, do I have to invest in this company, or could I just buy the product or service? And if I think there's value in supporting them, there's strategic value, and we can create value for them as well as ourselves, the understanding, accelerating the commercialization of deep decarbonization problems as a whole, and we can sort of financially benefit along the way from this, either through the financial investment or unique commercial structures, because we're having these organizations solving our unique problems, then there becomes a ton of strategic value that we can bring. A great example of one of the opportunities we're looking at here right now is, and this is one of the biggest reasons why we're spending time in this space, is the company that we're looking at wasn't even thinking about our market as being a potential solution to selling their product or services. Now they're going out and raising a little bit of capital here right now through a convertible note that will bridge them to their next round. But if we're successful here, we're going to open up a beachhead for them to think about their product for their next round. And that's going to drive a ton of value for the organization as well as for our company to see that be successful. We just like coming in at the front end of that and helping shape and influence the future direction of where they go first.
So TC's invested in a company, Carbon Clean. Maybe sort of walk us through in a practical way that specific example in terms of the cap table and what you can tell us.
Yeah, sure. So back in 2022, I'm going to get my times wrong here, it blurs now. We invested alongside Chevron, who led Carbon Clean Series C. So $150 million raise. We wrote a modest check as part of that mix. Interesting enough, they've got a technology that is building novel carbon capture technology, and they're modularizing and they're standardizing the technology and bringing down the cost through a rotating pack bag rather than using large absorber and desorber towers. So ability to really bring down cost. And so we got really excited about the opportunity as we went through our validation on the technology in terms of what that gets to. Now, when we saw it, it was capturing 1 ton per day. They've now got a couple deployments where they're doing 10 tons per day, and now they're fabricating, getting ready for 100 tons per day, and they're going to continue to scale from there. Right now, our team is iterating, and we're iterating multiple times around how do we help support that organization through getting that technology to market and supporting it through a demonstration. Now, that's lots of capital typically for these sorts of installations on first of a kind. So we're really trying to get innovative around how do you deploy, how do you validate and test. Maybe you don't think about deploying permanent sort of infrastructure around that technology. Maybe you think about temporary sorts of solutions to validate that technology. And those are ways that we can help really bring down cost and ultimately help to scale and grow these organizations. And so it's the work that goes into the conversations with that organization, because initially it was really interesting because they were a technology company with a capture technology company. Well, in our case, capture is only 30–40% of our total capital costs. I've got all the stuff going around my plant of capturing the flue gas, managing my heat transfers, everything else, and then my sequestration components and dehydration components as well. All those sort of integrated pieces are really critical, and they weren't even thinking about those challenges. And so what we've been able to help them do is think about those sorts of challenges and then get them better positioned to help solve that for other customers. And so we're bringing some of our technical chops, so to speak, to help support them on that basis. And at the same time, we're learning and growing, and they're helping us solve our unique problems as well.
I'm curious, we know there's a lot of financial capital coming into the market, and it has come in over the last few years. It continues to come in. We're still, I'd say, in my view, relatively early in the investing cycle. It started 4, 5, 6 years ago. But how do you think about the balance of strategic capital versus financial capital? Is there a need, given the quantity of capital required and the importance of strategics in terms of helping companies mature and commercialize technologies, is there a need for more strategics to put more capital into the market? I'm sort of asking it as an open question, I guess, so anyone want to comment on that?
Yes, please. The more the merrier. No, I mean, like we've been talking about this whole day, I mean, this is a very expensive transition. We need all the capital in play that we can get, and strategics are a very important part of that. Certainly to the extent that they can provide support off balance sheet and in-kind ways too, right? Engineering support, resources support, all kind of in kind is really critical along the way. But absolutely, and I think part of the challenge, at least as I'm seeing it from my vantage point, is first-of-a-kind projects are really tough to finance. And I applaud a number of strategics that have really stood tall and taken a bit more risk than most financials would, and appreciate that this thing may not work out. And they're interested in, the nth of a kind. They're even interested in the third of a kind, because that will be materially moving this forward, and understand that the first of a kind is not going to go well, probably. And that's just a reality. And so I think what the strategics do that's really valuable is putting in that earlier equity, being a little bit more patient and understanding. They're not necessarily fixated on the NPV and the returns and all of that of the first of a kind, although it does matter to get sort of internal buy-in. But those that are sort of thinking long-term about what this could mean once it's successful helps that sort of early financing. And then once the flywheel starts to kind of get underway, you invite financials to come in who can understand now, okay, what is the CapEx profile? What is the revenue streams? How does the whole market shape around it? Once you've shown it a few times, you create, the patterns that a lot of the institutional investors are looking for to provide those much bigger checks and are sort of more financially disciplined from that perspective. But I really do see a critical role, both of strategics and governments, to help get over that valley of death, whatever you want to call it, to get some of these things up and running and moving. And naturally, some of them, many of them, will fail. But as long as even 5 to 10% of them deliver and they move forward and they start to sort of build that momentum, I think that to me is what will drive energy transition. And there's no doubt that strategics play, one of the most critical and important roles, as long as, venture capitalists play a role as well. But even we get to a point where, we're out of our snack bracket, so to speak, where our equity is very expensive, and to fund an entire project on our sort of venture capital equity is extremely expensive. And you don't want to do that if you don't have to. And so I appreciate the sort of dynamic that these different types of entities that bring in capital for that first of a kind really move the needle forward.
If I may add to that, I was going to say there's obviously a huge need of capital in the energy transition as a whole, but we need to think of a way to have corporates are really good at bringing probably more sweat equity, and I'm thinking, innovation, especially at the earlier stage, because they have tools available on hand that we VC don't have. or is not a good use of the funds that we have that are so limited, and to be able to kind of go along the way as the company evolves. So aside from just the funding, is obviously all the great examples I have in mind are, whenever we had one of their corporate kind of sharing their vibration team on a specific technology that needed to be deployed in a harsh environment. Those at the earlier stage so valuable. So aside from just the funding, the sweat equity and how do we integrate that into the growth of the company is there's more thinking that needs to be done on that front, I think.
So is that to say you I don't want to misinterpret it, but you're seeing a lot of strategics who wouldn't necessarily be biased towards rolling up their sleeves and really working with the companies?
I think aside from, let's say, the VC or the corporate VC from the strategic organization that sits on the board, there's a whole bunch of, boots on the ground, teams behind that can be very, very helpful. And that's the best relationships we've had is with those guys that were really good at deploying the whole full-fledged, resources that they have on hand.
Do you see, maybe Derek, do you see challenges with strategics with their, there's always turnover in big corporates with their commercial teams, and how do you manage that if you've got a relationship starting with company X? How do you manage that relationship and ensure that the continued focus is there on the portfolio company?
It can be a challenge. I think, our vehicle, Oxy Low Carbon Ventures, has been small enough, and there's been a lot of there's not been turnover at all, and so we haven't really had to deal with it or encounter it. But yeah, I can see that as a challenge. I think there's it's having different touch points that helps, right? It's that overlap that I think helps. So like my primary role, I'm not, I don't have a scientific background. I'm not a technologist. My background is actually in law, and so I can manage the relationship from a high level. There are technical teams that are plugged in and that are working, and if they're for some reason a change in focus, or even if there is turnover at some point, I can help manage through that process. Similarly, if there's turnover at my level or whatever, I think the organization sort of has recognized that there's multiple levels of engagement, and they'll find the right person to come back in without disrupting the technical teams, or have the right person come back in and sort of manage the whole process. I think that's how we're thinking about it, but we haven't been tested yet.
Lee, anything you'd add?
I mean, like for us, it's critical that we've got buy-in from the top of our organization to what we're doing, first and foremost. So we make sure that is there. So from our CEO all the way down, that those are critical steps. But we try to intersect from a communication standpoint across multiple layers in the organization, at working group levels that are supporting us in due diligence efforts, to middle levels that are thinking about deployments, and then into senior levels. And so if you have disruption at different levels in that organization, you've always got abilities to hopefully have connections on one or two others along the way. And the other way we've actually tried to manage some of these risks and these challenges, Barrie, is we've set up our venture investment committee, so a committee that's overseeing our investments and helping to support the recommendations we're making. They are active participants in supporting that sit within our business unit themselves, and so they become advocates for what we're investing in, the portfolio companies, and so they become conduits for us as well to help support and help to hopefully catalyze some of these technologies.
We're going to run out of time in about a minute, but maybe a last question for everyone. Do you think there's a role for existing investors, financial or strategics, in terms of working with other strategics to bring more capital to the table? Like, is there a role for you guys to be advocates for other strategics to play in this market? I'll start with you, Erin.
Plug for Evok. You can be an LP of Evok, and we will manage those investments on your behalf if you're not sure how to do venture. No, sorry. No, I think there's a lot of interest, and I think a lot of strategics are figuring out their way and how to play in this. And I think recognizing that, wow, if I just sit here and wait, these technologies don't just show up. Like, I have to actually participate in this. I actually have to really champion and help these. And venture is a tool in the toolbox, and so I absolutely would welcome more and more strategics to come into the mix. And I mean, truthfully, a lot of our LPs are working with us as partners to kind of figure out how to do this and how to play along this journey and what their sort of best practices kind of are and how to roll up their sleeves. But the value of it in the long term in terms of, hey, what I get out in terms of a financial reward doesn't really matter. I put in $5 million, I get a 30% return. That's chump change. What really matters is whether that technology actually makes it to the other end of commercialization and changes my business fundamentally, and that's what matters. So the more, the better.
So we're out of time, but maybe does anyone else want to add in on that comment at all? Nothing?
No, we need partnerships across the board to solve these problems. So from our
Absolutely.
standpoint, those things are all going to be recipes for success, especially for these first-of-kind types of solutions, to get that flywheel really going.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lee, Derek, Catherine, and Erin for joining us on stage. Really appreciate your time. I think we're now just taking a break, so please go out and have a beverage.